Okay, I am glad to see almost everybody weathered the weather and came back. Um, I was saying to a couple of people, it felt like it went down 5 to 10 degrees over the lunch break, so that's not a good sign. We might have some snow by this evening. We'll just have to see what's going on. So we're going to do a couple of different things with our activities this afternoon. We're going to start off with Carol talking about some of the uh, activities and services and things, resources that she has. Then we're going to, she has some slides for that. We're going to talk over a little bit of some of the things that Performing Arts Readiness has. And then we're going to get specifically into the plan writing clinic and some of the beginning activities for that. And then what we'll probably do is about an hour and 15 minutes of discussion, and then a chance to work with all of you as we go through some of your disaster plans, talk through your disaster plans. So I'll turn things over to Carol for now.
Okay, so I can't see you all that well, but anyway, I hope everybody made it back from lunch okay, and you are good to go. I started on this journey not quite 9 years, it was about 2017, and Par was only a couple of years old at that point. And it was sort of an accidental thing. I've done a lot of things in my life, but I never did a circuit rider. So as soon as I heard the term circuit rider, and then it was emergency preparedness, I said, well, am I on a horse, with a couple of saddlebags of water, and I throw it on a fire, or what? What is a circuit rider? And we went to training, and there was so much information that what I really began to understand is that small to mid-sized organizations, organizations of color, all of these folks that I deal with had no access to this information, and they didn't really know anything about it, and it wasn't on their radar unless, well, what we always like to say, it's not a priority till it becomes a priority. And so I felt really compelled to do something about that as I continued on this process. So the first step, like I said before, was education and awareness. And we were doing workshops left and right with people, trying to get them up on it really hard. Tom and I have had some smaller audiences. We had 2 or 3 people, and we're still rolling out the information. But it's hard, and Carrie and I were talking about it out in the lobby. It's really a challenge for people to put this on their agenda when they have 5,000 things that they're already doing. So what I ultimately did was say, okay, I'm going to research everything somebody would need to put their emergency plan together, and I'm going to compile it. So the first one we had was like, I think we called it 1.0. So that was a really lightweight version of all of these sub plans that you might need for your emergency plan. Then I said, well, we need to up it a notch. And we took it to 1.5. And then I said, well, it needs to be pretty and it needs to have fillability where you can just fill it in and it's not a hassle, and you can add your own documents to it. So we finally came up with the 2.0 version. Y'all need to give this one a standing ovation. Ta-da! This is the 2.0 version. And so this has all the sub-plans that somebody could ask for. It has crisis communication, business continuity, archiving and preservation. Um, what is it? When we have COVID, all of the information that you might have. It has all kinds of forms. Outside of this, there's a whole resource folder that comes with it, with any form that you might need for your organization. This is adaptable. It's primarily geared towards dance and dance organizations, but as an individual artist or as a organization that deals with the arts and any art form, you can really adapt it for what you need. And it's online, and it was basically online all the time until last year when I finally bound it, and I was like, wow, that's a lot. It looks pretty good bound. And so when I showed it to people, they were like, oh, I want the bound one. But it is available. And then I took it a step further and I said, well, people really need a resource. So that's when we were talking about 5, 6, 7, 8, help. And we came up with that so that people could call in and have like a hotline for help. And we kind of piloted this with Arts Administrators of Color and IEBD, and they sent out to their network that they could actually contact me and they could get this emergency planning help. So even though we package it that way, I was getting contacts, and it wasn't actually a hotline. I'd like to really make it a telephone line that we could use as well, but it was a Gmail, and you email me and we set you up for an appointment. And what was amazing is that how much people need to talk about just what they're doing as artists, period. And so I got a call from a rapper that wanted to know how he could get his stuff promoted a lot better than he was doing. I got a call from a young man that was a vocalist that was transitioning, and since his voice was changing, how was he going to reconfigure his career? It was bizarre. So many different approaches and so many different issues came up. Even though we were talking about emergency planning, all of these things fell under that umbrella. So 5, 6, 7, 8 help is still in its infancy in terms of being structured. So we're putting a website together. We're getting all of these pieces together that people can reach out. But I'm still working with different organizations to help them with their emergency planning. So if anybody needs assistance, I am local, I am here, and I'm available. So next slide. So these are the services that I offer. Customized planning. We also do leadership assessment. We do board training, ongoing support. Because all of us know that our organizations create amazing work. We can do all kinds of things creatively. But the weakest piece of what we do is our infrastructure. And so right now I'm advising those folks that are new and unused, they are on really geared up to go, to hold back a little bit and really rethink and start with your infrastructure, because that will sustain you so that you can go on and do your work. Next slide. So how do you do that? How do you take action? So number one, you schedule a consultation. The email is 5678help@gmail.com, and you have that in your packet as well. So you schedule a consultation because we want to look at what is a priority for you and start with that. Like I said, you cannot do all of the things we've talked about today. You can only eat the elephant one bite at a time. And you actually, within the resource guide that I have, you actually create a 3 to 5 year plan for how you're going to structure your emergency plan itself. And then assess your needs. Now, Tom talked about the physical assessment. In what we do with the resource guide is there's an internal assessment and there's an external assessment, and then there's a physical assessment. So internally, you're looking and assessing where your people are. Okay, so how is your staff? What's the temperature with your staff? What's the temperature with your board? Because your board has to be behind this too. What's the temperature with any other stakeholders? And you don't want to do this alone. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I'm the person that says I do at other people's wedding. So you do not want to be there. You want to be the person that can gather a team, okay, and we call it your emergency planning team that you put together so that you are not put upon with all of this work by, being that person that's just self-sacrificing. So you want to make sure you have a strong team, and it should be a board member. It should be whatever stakeholders that want to come on board and really do the work. And that's the hard piece. Okay, then develop your plan. So developing your plan is not something that happens overnight. you might only develop maybe one part of this plan. So you might say, well, for me, what we need to address is crisis communication, because our communication is not that good. And if something should happen, it's not really lined out, it's not really clear to everybody. So you might want to start with that. Then, looking at the plan, you want to see how much you're going to take on and in what year. So year one, you might only take on 2 sections. Year two, you might take one. Year three, you might take the rest. It just depends on where you want to go and how committed you are to getting it done. Then the next is to implement and make sure you drive. Okay, so you want to implement what you're doing, and that means, where's the plan going to live? Okay, is it going to hopefully not end up in a box under your bed? So you want to make sure that you have it on a jump drive, you have a hard copy, you have all of the pieces that you need to have in order to make your plan live and thrive. Okay, next slide. So the template, again, like I said, is for dancers, individual artists, dance studios, dance organizations, dance companies, non-dance arts organizations and artists, and it's available with services, okay? So I am basically a consultant now with IEBD, and you can go through them or you can go directly through me to get the information as well. Next slide, or is this the last one? Oh, there's one more. Okay, talking about all the pieces in the guide. Like I said, there's all kinds of mini plans in there. I know for some studios, they have, say, an incident report. There's a extra folder, like I said, that comes with this, and it has all kinds of mini plans and many forms in there that you can also use. You'll see the pocket resource form in your folder. And that's just, it's not how it would usually come. We usually fold it as a brochure type thing. And it just has all of the immediate information listed for an emergency. But there are other forms in there that you can use that are really, really valuable as well. And next slide. Or is that the last one? It might be the last one. No. That's the
Okay.
last one. Okay.
All right.
All right. So if there are any questions about it, should we do this?
Yeah, we can do 1 or 2 questions now or later. Any questions?
And I can't hear you, but can't see you. Anybody have a question?
We got one
Yes.
sort of in the back.
How do we get a bound copy of it?
I'm sorry, you gotta speak real
How
loud.
do we get a bound copy of the?
To get a bound copy, you can contact me, just email me at 5678help@gmail.com. Okay? And you can take a look at it, guys, before you leave, and you'll see all of the information that's inside as well. Anybody else have a question?
I don't.
Usually, if Tom and I don't get questions, that makes us feel like we really know what we're doing and talking about.
And so we'll have chances for more questions, but thank you, Carol. Usually we don't have this part of this workshop. We don't have local people who work and do this as much. Carol has been a person who did the circuit rider activity, but then has continued on. We had an IADD network that was for the DMV at first, and that was so successful. And we talked and worked with so many people that we talked and thought about doing a national and really even international IADD network, and that's where a lot of these things got generated. So those are great resources. I wanted to talk with you. We don't want to have to jump around left and right with all sorts of handouts throughout the slides throughout the session. So I just say on the last couple of pages of handouts, starting with slide 29 of the session from this morning, you'll see just a couple of things that I'll run through real quickly. The phone tree or emergency call list, just showing the kind of thing that you want to do so you can get a hold of everybody in your organization. You'll see two really good examples of quick response guides. RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design, had a wonderful thing where they said, we think we're going to have these 8 disasters the most. And so they have a whole bunch of things, including bomb threats and other areas, and thinking about what they would need to deal with tornadoes, bomb threats, etc. Right next to it is Boston University Medical Center. They thought that their main concern was fire. And so they had this, it's called the RACE concept. It's rescue and remove people, alert and activate everyone to let them know what's going on, confine the fire if you can, and then extinguish it. And that may be something you can do if it's a small fire and you had fire extinguisher training, or it might be something where you would have to talk to a bigger group. We have just a couple of other things with the PAR resources, and it talks about all of our activities. And I'd say the main ones are on slides 32 and 33. The idea of case studies on the site. You'll see about halfway down that list is Dancing in the Light, DIW's transformation after the loss of its founder. And that really took us off into another direction with succession planning discussions. And then on slide 33, we've got 17 of the 26 webinars that we have, webinars on a wide variety of activities related to disaster planning. These are free. Most of them are about 90 minutes with experts, international experts, as well as US-based excerpts. And so you can easily get to those through the PAR website, or we're going to switch them over to the LYRASIS website soon. And then finally, we have D-Plan Arts Ready, which is a disaster plan for libraries, archives, and museums from the D-Plan side, and Arts Ready from the art side. And they try to bring these tools together. And so it's an online planning tool that really focuses a lot on the risk assessment aspect of things. And arts organizations, we can still have arts organizations who sign up this month get a free year subscription. So that's one way and one part of building up your activities. And then the last thing I'll mention is just from slides 35 and 36, the fact that there are a lot of partners out there. Certainly there's PAR. There's also, and there was a postcard for this on the back table, NCAPER, which is a national coalition on arts preparedness and emergency response. And NCAPER goes beyond the idea of just working with performing arts organizations. It talks about every type of arts organization, including visual arts, literary arts, etc. All of the resources, all of the assets that are currently created for PAR are moving over to the NCAPER website by January 4th. So you'll be able to see that. You see something called SURF Plus, the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, and that is for individual artists and especially for craft artists. So they are a member of NCAPER, but they also are a great standalone organization that give post-disaster grants to people if you have a situation like that. We mentioned D-Plan Arts Ready. Another group is the National Heritage the National Heritage Emergency National Task Force. Sorry, I'll spit it out one time or another. That is about 60 organizations, everything from Library of Congress and the Smithsonian, all the way over to arts organizations like NCAPER and Surf Plus, getting together when the disasters get too big. When they get to the point where they're going over county boundaries and they might take over a whole state or a couple of states, that is an important group. And finally, on the left-hand side of that slide, we have FAIC, the Foundation for Advancement in Conservation, and they have 2 programs. One of them is called the Alliance for Response Program, and they have in the Washington, D.C. area and about 35 other areas, networks of professionals in the arts and culture areas working with fire and emergency management folks on a regular basis. So that's a group to look with. And then the National Heritage Responders is really amazing. They are about 130 trained conservators. Some of them are good at working with wooden objects. Some of them are good with working with painted materials, others with sculptures, etc. And they are conservators who are on call when a disaster happens, and they are able to, on a volunteer basis, come to your facility and help you if a disaster happens and if a large scale thing happens. It was kind of amazing to me after Hurricane Harvey. I got down to Houston pretty much as quick as I could. National Heritage Responders had already been there, saving some of those 9,000 out of the 90,000 props that they said were the main things to take a look at. And one more Houston-related type of commentary here is that the Houston Arts Alliance has these great short videos available, and they just put them on their YouTube channel. So they've got these short videos, about 3 to 4 minutes, really good instruction on dealing with a bunch of these concerns and a bunch of these problems, and they've got more things that are coming on there too. So I just wanted to make sure that we covered those before we went on. And you will see out front, we had PAR and BARN, which is the Bay Area Arts Readiness Network, and then consulting services in disaster planning from LYRASIS. All of those things are covered on some of those postcards that are out front if you want to take those. But at this point, we're actually going to switch over to the second part of our class. We just wanted to make sure that you knew about all those resources before we went forward. And we're going to talk about plan development. And let me get this over here. We had an opportunity this morning to give a little bit of background, and Carrie gave a little bit of background on Carol and I. We have had a lot of experience doing this type of work. So I think we'll get a chance when we talk with you to find out specifically about your organizations. But one of the things I was going to say is there are going to be a lot of questions, and there's going to be probably a lot of interaction and participation in this session. I'm going to ask you to participate as we go along. So on our second slide here, we've got our agenda. And we're going to talk about some initial considerations while you're doing disaster plan, developing your disaster plan. Carrie and I talked about the importance of testing the plan because sometimes it might sit on the shelf and never get used. Best practice examples, a couple of things that I always fall back on. And then working on institutional plans and working with individual plans. And that's where we're going to talk with you about the kind of things that you are interested in from that point of view. So on our next slide, let's go ahead and talk about some of the initial considerations. And what we want to think about there is what type of institution are you developing the disaster plan for? And it can be an individual artist. It can be an individual researcher who would be at a library, archive, or museum. So you'll see performing arts organizations, other types of arts organizations as well, and then libraries, archives, museums, and historical societies. I know that there are a ton of those around this area, so we want to make sure that we cover that type of thing as well. What types of collections do you have? Okay, this is really important. Just to think about everything you have. You might have scripts, scores, historical, and business records. Although I will say, when I did one of those archival visits that we talked about this morning, I went to a place where they had two pods at a storage place. One of them was filled with some of their programmatic documents and some of their extra merchandise. The other one was filled with their tax records. And when we went back and looked at the tax records, it said taxes 1970. I was like, no, you don't need to keep this anymore. Depending on what state, district, or wherever you're at, there are different rules for how far you need to keep your tax records back. And we actually helped them limit those business records that they had enough that they could get rid of that the second storage area. So thinking about that with the business records, props and objects taking up a lot of space, audio-visual materials. We talked about computer and electronic records quite a bit, and then book and paper collections. And to ask you all, I'm going to move a little bit further up here so I'm not directly in the light. How many of you have other materials that are in your collections that you want to make sure are safe? Okay, toward the back.
We have a lot of art.
I'm sorry?
We have a lot of art supplies.
Okay, we have art supplies, we have those materials. Other things that people might have. I've been to a couple of places here in the Baltimore, Washington area, and one that we saw was architectural drawings. And the way we found out about those architectural drawings, unfortunately, was they were near a windowsill that had a lot of water on it. The water was cascading onto the floor, onto the box with these architectural drawings and blueprints. And when we pulled one of them out, it was half gone because the water had gotten to it so much. So these are important things. If they're your building or if they're buildings around your area, that's important to think about as well. Other types of collections. Yes.
So the commission houses the district's art collection.
Okay. Yeah.
Works on paper, mostly paper, canvas,
Mm-hmm.
some stone sculptures,
Okay.
wire.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh.
you know,
And what I might suggest for that,
markets.
I'm sorry?
It's a market model.
Okay. Okay. Um, This is where I might suggest, and the organization is based in DC, so it would be a good thing to work with. The Foundation for Advancement in Conservation, FAIC, has a disaster services part of the organization, and they're the ones who I said have the National Heritage Responders and the Alliance for Response Group. I really think that with especially unique types of art materials, where you might be holding the only copy that exists of it or one of very few printed copies, having a conservator on call for some of those materials is really important to look at. So, good, we've got the list that's here, and we've got the other ideas that you had. I think considering all of those is going to be really important to think about everything you need to work with. Next slide. So, let's go back one, sorry. Thinking about a couple of other initial considerations. What are your staffing resources? Who will be on your disaster team? Again, that might be, we don't want a team of one. We want to see how you can, work with other people and network with them to build your team among a couple of organizations if you have to. There's a group called the 5 Colleges of Ohio that I worked with. And this was very interesting because their libraries all started working with each other because they didn't have a ton of staff with a lot of preservation experience. And so they all toured each other's organizations. They all learned about each other's collections. They all learned about each other's building, including one building, which will not be named here, but they were known for the fact that before they got their roof replaced, they had 66 buckets on their top floor to catch water that was dripping through the roof. So that was a group that was knew how to recover from water emergencies because they had them all the time. But they built those into the team. And think about what other institutions you can work with.
Yeah, and I find it's a particular challenge for people's archival materials in the city. Looking at where these things can be housed, even looking to the point, looking at how you can categorize what you're going to keep, what you're going to consider an archive, what you're going to give away. that whole process has to be well thought out and planned. It's really challenging here because just like we don't have a dance archives in my particular area, and trying to find places that we can house things. Um, I believe Liz Lerman, who founded Dance Exchange, her things are at the University of Maryland. But there are still a bunch of artists that we have lost. They've not lost, but they've transitioned, and we still have their things, and where do we put them? So that's a consideration as well. Once you have gotten everything or gathered everything, and once you've cataloged it all, where are you going to put it? And I might also offer another caveat too, that don't wait too late. Because, and I've had this discussion with Tom, at a certain age, let's face it, we don't care. Okay. So there's got to be a good prime time that you really deal with the artifacts of an artist or someone in your organization. I had the tremendous privilege of actually going to Catherine Dunham's house in East St. Louis. If you don't know Catherine Dunham, she was an icon of Black dance. And if you've seen the movie Stormy Weather, her dancers are in that. And so we went to her house, and her house was connected to a museum that she had built. And they used to have amazing festivals, and they reconstructed African villages out in the back, she and her husband. And her stormy weather costume was actually in a glass encasement, but it was not airtight. So her stormy weather costume was dry rot. So when we got up to see her, she was, of course, very much still alive, but she said, "Oh, I know you all thought I was dead." And she was in her little bed. She had her bell to ring for whoever. And, we were just so honored and privileged to see her and be there with her. But she didn't care about her dress. She was 80 some years old. She didn't care about it. So you cannot wait too late. There has to be a good age range that you are really working with these icons in terms of their artifacts and what they want to happen to these things and where they are. And so looking at that, catch them before 70, catch them before that time, because that's after that period of time, they may be like, I don't care what happens with this stuff. It's just so much stuff. And it becomes just stuff. So really look at the timing of how you are working with people to maintain the legacies that they've left behind that are physical.
And I think one thing that Carol mentioned that's really important here is to sort of keep, archive, or give away piles of things. And, one of the things that people have talked about as somewhat of a curse word in cultural heritage and arts is the idea of de-accessioning things. If you're bringing things into your museum and bringing things into your archive, can you put together a collection policy so they're not giving you your 20th copy of the local newspaper going back 100 years? Or can you decide, we've got 3 good copies of that, I don't know if we need to spend the rest of the time with the other 17. So a collection policy and a de-accessioning policy are important as well.
Right, and even though this is dance related, Dance USA has a wonderful section on their website about archiving and preservation. I did not try to recreate that. I don't recreate the wheel. And I use them as a resource in the template, but they really take you step by step. And I think it can apply to anything, not just dance, but go to their website. It's an excellent piece about archiving and preservation.
Okay, thank you. We'll go through a few more of these slides. Initial considerations. We talked a lot about this morning, but who will be on the disaster team? What other assistance can you get? Where are you located? Is it urban or rural? And how close are those emergency services to you? And then what is your audience? Is it mainly staff? Are there performers? Are there audiences for performing arts or patrons for your library, archive, or museum? So important things to consider. Next slide, developing a disaster plan. What characteristics do you want? Well, we definitely want to have some comprehensiveness or coverage to cover those different types of collections that you talked about, but we want to have simplicity. We don't want to have there's a large public library where I went in, and they had a 300 page disaster plan in a 3-ring binder. And I was thinking about that. If the water is dripping from your ceiling, you don't want to probably be flipping through all those pages. So what can you do? And can you get maybe a miniature version, a one-sheet version, as well as the larger version? And then flexibility, having that shorter plan and maybe a detailed plan as well. So, yes.
And I'll touch back on the fact that, for everything that you might want to put together, your plan might look very thick, but you should also have those things that are easy to go to. I was telling somebody else that we used to call it a drop dead book, but that was too morbid. So now we call it grab and go. So the most important information is part of your grab and go box. And keeping it flexible, is really, really important to make sure you are re-upping this. You really have to make a commitment to this, okay? You can't be almost pregnant, okay? So you gotta make a commitment to keep up with this and revisit it from time to time so that you know that the information is there. In the template that I have, there's a page for all of your really secure information. So your passwords, your bank accounts, your legal accounts, all of those things that people who, if something should happen to the founder, should be able to put their hands on right away. Now that's secured information, so that has to have some kind of system so that you know what the hierarchy of people would be who would have access to that information. So it can get a little spicy dicey, and that's why you kind of need direction for this. It's not about finding somebody who can write your emergency plan, because that's not how it works. You really have to develop it within your organization, because each organization is unique, each individual is unique. But you can get guidance in terms of putting your plan together and what you need.
And I like the term, I like the grab and go term rather than the drop dead book. My colleague Jan Newcomb always calls it the drop dead book. I call it the I won the lottery book. So, what would you do if somebody on your staff won the lottery and said, I'm not coming back even tomorrow? And that is this idea of succession planning, this idea of disaster planning. So let's go on from here to the next slide. And this is a slide with a lot of points. And we're going to talk about almost all of these in the next couple of slides. But I wanted to mention having a table of contents, and actually Carol has hers open to her table of contents right here, so you're not saying, where the heck is that section that I'm looking for? The coverage of the plan. Are you looking, and we've talked with some groups here today where they're thinking about covering a whole campus of buildings, whether it's an academic campus or a museum that has a couple of different buildings. It might be to cover one building, or it might just be to even cover one department. So what is the coverage of the plan? And then the responsibility and authority of who gets assigned what.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember the building that we saw in Philly, and they had 5 buildings.
Yes, yeah,
It was like a village, and
yes.
we didn't do a plan for them, but they were considering doing a plan, and they were renovating some of the buildings and all of that, but it was quite interesting that they had 5 buildings.
Yes.
That comprised their whole piece.
And they actually wanted to look for coverage for all of those, and there were some that were relatively new builds and some that were there from the very beginning. So they really had to think about different things at each place. So we're going to go through all these other points in our next couple of slides. So with the next one, let's take a look at the idea of some of the component details. We talked about the introduction, the idea of how to use the document. Yeah, if we could move on to the next slide from here, that would be great. Okay, the introduction, how to use a document, how and when to revise a document. What you don't want to do is pull out a disaster plan from a file folder or from your bookshelf and see that it's 10 years old. I had somebody do that and I said, I'm the only person who's still here out of all 15 people on the team. This is useless, and I'm going to have to do all of it myself. So she had to get the plan redone. So revision, trying to do that on a yearly basis is really important. And then who has the roles and responsibilities of who's, the person who knows the building best, and that's oftentimes facilities and operations. Who knows IT the best, and that might be if you have an IT department or the ticketing area. So that's important. Advanced actions, activities to undertake if advance warning is received, and then an emergency information sheet for internal and external responders. Karen?
Yeah, I was gonna say that sometimes I run into organizations where, and you all may experience this as well, or maybe doing this, but their emails, things, something as simple as their emails, in terms of, rather than being generic, because people are going in and out of positions, that a lot of the work will be based on that personal company email, Carol at such and such.com. And instead of it being that person's role, community engagement at such and such.com. So those kinds of things are intricacies that people need to pay attention to from time to time, how they're setting up things. And the same with your emergency planning. So it's not going to necessarily be that your response team is Sally, Joe, and Abraham. It may be that it's going to be, no matter what happens within the course of your organization, and then on that response team is always going to be the chair of the board, the ED, the business manager, or whatever position that someone may fall into should be the people listed on your response team.
And I really like that. There was a place in Philadelphia that I was working with, and they got one of the PAR disaster planning grants, and they had a ton of turnover even during the year period where they were putting that plan together. And so they said, we're going to do operations manager at, we're going to do front of house at, and so they assigned them to email roles. So I think that was really helpful. Um, on your next slide here, when we're thinking about that, we have some ideas of communication plan. What are your communication strategies? Are you going to be using cell phones, texting, etc.? I've seen a couple of people with closed text loops, especially at some festivals, where they said, we want to be able to text each other and respond really quickly. They have to be paying better attention to their text than I was this morning when Carol was texting me. But thinking about how you would do all of those activities. And then are there sample messages you can have for setting outgoing messages while you're having a disaster to let people know that maybe your organization isn't open with the regular hours that they used to have. The phone tree should include names and titles, work, cell, and home phone numbers, if possible, including for text, and emails and additional contact information.
And in the guide,
Yes,
the template,
yes.
there is a form for all of that that you can use, and it lists the hierarchy. And there are several forms in case, 1 year it's that person, and the next year it's another person. But we do advise that it be the person's position and then their name as well. But that does exist within the form. All of the many plans that Tom was mentioning, we were very, very fortunate to be able to put that as a part of the guide.
The next thing, when I talked in this morning's presentation about the most important part of things, as far as my most important part of the slide deck, if we move on to the salvage priority slide next, the idea of talking about what's there is really important. What are your vital institutional records and information? This is how you operate. What do you need to have your operations going? So operating documents. Items on loan from other organizations. This was even before I started working with arts organizations. I had a call from a museum that was in the Mid-South, and they said, we've had a fire, and then the fire department came in, and they seem to have used all the water from 3 counties putting the fire out in our facility. What should we do? And I said, didn't I just read about the fact that you all had a traveling exhibit in your museum? And they said, yes. And I said, you need to really, as quick as you do anything else, let the organization that was the center for this exhibit know that this has happened, because they may have their own disaster plan for those materials. So working with loan materials is important. Materials that directly support the mission of your organization, business and program records, charters. You heard me say this morning the fact that a charter was lost in just the file naming from digital records. Unique or most valuable items. This is the props. The Alley Theater said that we have 9,000 of the 90,000 that we want to make sure we take care of because they're unique. If you have rare scripts and rare books. And what I want you to do is on the bottom of this slide, it says include the physical location and retention period for them, and that can help you decide what you want to keep and what are some of the most important things to salvage. So going on from there, in our next slide, the response activity outline. So you have a phone tree. We talked about putting that together, assess the situation, the kind of thing that we talked about in the first part of the class, and the kind of thing you do when you get on site. Prepare your team to enter. Is it bad enough that you need personal protective equipment, goggles, respirators? Oftentimes, if there's been standing water, we think there might have been mold, or if there have been materials that were hazardous materials, you'll definitely need that. Assess the damage to buildings, materials, and collections. And here's something I'll say with that. Go from the outside in. What is happening as far as our windows blown out? Are there architectural features of the building that have fallen out because, or fallen off because there's an earthquake or some type of situation? Stabilizing the environment. It's hard to achieve these, but what we want to do is like 68 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit is a great level for that, and 40 to 55% relative humidity and keeping light levels low. That's what we want to do. Now, what we can do, particularly if a lot of these are areas where the public is touring through and things, we might need to change that around a little bit. And then determine the mitigation actions. That term that came up this morning and is continuing on through this afternoon. Anything that you can do to lessen the damage, to decrease the amount of damage is important.
And then, in the guide, there is a form for you to put in your contractors, your engineers, or any vendor that you would be using to make repairs or to, give you new equipment if you need it. But there's a place for you to write down their information and contact information. And the point of having an emergency plan is that whether you're there or the intern is there, there is a resource that they can go to and they can immediately access the people who can help with whatever the situation may be. So having that information recorded is vital and critical to being able to keep yourself up and running.
And we are jumping around from piece to piece, and I'm glad that Carol is actually bringing these back to some concrete things while we're talking about it. But on our next slide is supplies and what you might have for supplies. And we talk about providing a suggested list of supplies and where to purchase them. In the sample plans that we have on the Performing Arts Readiness website, In the plan that I'm going to list in one of our later slides from Amigos Library Services, Amigos Preservation Services, there are supplies you would need. Regular things for general cleanup, but also having an internal and external location of supply storage. I love what Pittsburgh's Alliance for Response did. They had, well, first of all, they decided that they didn't want all these organizations spending $1,000 or $1,500 each on buying disaster supplies. So they got a $5,000 grant and they put them all in a central place on University of Pittsburgh's campus that is 24/7 available to people who are a member of their network. And so that was a great external place because I remember this really well. Now that I'm in Arizona, even better. There was a disaster that I have called the Niagara of the Southwest, where there started to be a leak on the third floor, and it went down the stairwell down to the basement. And the pictures that they had from that situation were all of their disaster supplies floating in the water in the basement. So don't store them in the basement, and think about having an outside storage place. Storage supplies in a locked and secure area, and inventory your supplies at least annually. I think flashlights, batteries, making sure that your flashlights actually work if you have to crawl around a dark building is going to be important to consider and important to look like so that they're not used up.
And I always advise people as well to have a buddy organization. Say you can't utilize your space, then where can you go? And being able to buddy with another organization that might take you in. We actually did this. There was a new organization, Viva Dance School, and they lost their space. We invited them to come to Joy of Motion until their new space was ready. And we shared our space with them, and it worked out very well. And it sustained them while they were waiting to find and make sure their new space was ready for them.
And that was making me smile because when the storms happened in Houston, both in 2001 with Tropical Storm Allison, and then after Hurricane Harvey, there was an alternative space that everybody went to. I don't understand how this space did not get as flooded as everything else, but University of Houston tended to remain dry. And we always say that the head of the library and that the university president must have had a red telephone on their desk for everybody to call and say, help, can we, get into your facility and do our performance there? And the joke was that there were performances that were going on in the cafeteria, in the food prep area, and in a large coat closet, a coat check area at University of Houston in their union because everybody else's facilities were underwater. So having that alternative space is really important. And that was really proved to me through everything that happened with Hurricane Harvey. Okay, the next thing to think of on our next slide, collaborative planning. We talked about sharing your plan with the police, fire, emergency management officials, neighboring institutions and insurance representatives, and even potential funders. Working with vendors. I've talked to a couple of people today who used local vendors for situations where they had disasters going on. But the idea of having a statement of work ready to use, including names, addresses, and phone numbers of contractors, I usually wouldn't do this, but I would just say because I've been working with these people for 35 years, that there are a couple of organizations that I would suggest to you. One of them is the Belfor, BELFOR. They are local, but they have a number of resources concentrated in Texas. They know where their bread is buttered, I think, who can help you recover from disasters. So if for libraries, archives, arts organizations, you have something like this that is bigger than your local folks can deal with, that's important. Close by in Easton, Pennsylvania, there's a group called Polygon Disaster Services. They have something that's called a vacuum freeze dryer, where if you have 5,000 books that get wet, they can put them in the vacuum freeze drying chamber and they'll be frozen put in the chamber, and they'll come out without the liquid and without the idea that there's going to be a lot of ink bleeding around. And then BMS CAT, Blackman Mooring Schematic Catastrophe in Fort Worth is another good group. Carol.
Yeah, and I'll go back to the insurance issue. Make sure you read your insurance policy. Like I said, make sure you know the policy of the owner if you're renting or leasing space, because putting in a claim may entail, as you know from your home insurance or whatever, it may entail some kind of deductible, it may entail time. And you have to factor that in to whatever you're trying to do to get yourself up and running again from a major disaster or even a minor disaster. If, say, your toilets are flooded, it's an issue that could be a claim on your insurance. You gotta wait until they approve it, they send an adjuster, all of those things. So make sure you have an understanding of that timeline that will come in play when you're dealing with insurance.
And another thing with insurance, this was a discussion I had during a lunch break with one organization that says, what happens if your insurance company just quits, goes belly up, goes out of business when you're having a situation, or they say your claim is so large, we have to break off this contract with you. So exploring your insurance policy and being able to do that on the front end is really important. The other thing that we talked about, I just wanted to mention this because this is the season, may even be the day today when this starts. We have to think about winterizing our buildings because I know that last year there were a ton of pipe breaks from both historic buildings or general buildings that were going on around here. So what can you do to make sure pipes are wrapped? What can you do to make sure that water is running through some of the pipes on a regular basis and not flying out of the pipes? All of those things are important to consider as well. So two things I wanted to mention that came from a discussion over the lunch break. Staging space, just the idea of contacting your building owner and those with additional space about availability and arrangements for use of alternative spaces, exactly what Carol talked about, and outline procedures on how to resume operations in the new space. Does that mean you're going to have to do ticketing out of this new space? What you need to think about there. The next slide is on recovery techniques. And I think that we want to really consider a couple of different things with the recovery techniques, concentrating on evacuation plans and addressing those top risks. The things when we went through our activities this morning that said you need to have, those are the A's and B's among your risks, and handling and recovery for priority materials. What's the sequence of steps to mitigate further damage to your organization, to your building, to your staff, patrons, and collections? The instructions need to be clear and simple so the staff can understand them and implement them. All right. So let's see here. Let's skip one more slide and go to the appendices. These are some of the things that you can have in your plan. These are a number of things that Carol has in her plan. The phone tree, the list of essential contacts, contracts, and resources. Who are the local, state, and federal agencies who you can reach out to? The supply list, the forms that Carol mentioned that she has that you can actually use whole cloth right out of her book and use that. And then reduced size floor plans. Another question I wanted to ask all of you. How many of you could go back to your organization and put your hands this afternoon on floor plans for your, oh, this isn't bad. Oh, good. We have about half the group saying that they could find floor plans. I can't believe it. Usually it's nobody. Nobody is raising their hand. And people say, why do I need to have this? Well, if you see the fact that there's water bubbling up from the first floor restroom or through a drain pipe, you need to know what that is connected to. So that's really important. What other ideas? What other things, first Carol and then the group, would you say might be considered for inclusion in the plan? Carol, any other things?
I think really, like I said, it's a lot to take on. and really determining what type of organization you have, what you're dealing with, what is your in and out, who is your audience is going to be coming in to utilize your services or utilize your space. Really getting a good, clear assessment of what your needs are. Then you can formalize a very sturdy plan. Um, the guide that I have will give you all of the pieces that you need, but it's still really upon you to determine what specifics you're going to pull out and use as your plan. So being very clear when you go through and you do your assessments in terms of what is needed. You may be in a situation where you're not necessarily wanting to deal with the physical piece first. Maybe there is some internal piece that you have to iron out. Maybe your board is not strong. These are all factors that come into play. You have to identify what are the key pieces that will keep your organization up and running and what you want to use. So I would say that the critical piece to look at is really being clear about what it is you want your plan to address and what you want it to address first and how you will address the other immediate issues over a certain length of time.
And let's go on to our next slide on the idea of testing the disaster plan. This is something that Carrie and I talked about. She said, we don't just want people to create the plans, we want them to test the plans and update them when we can. So key steps, distributing it, promoting it, training team members to use it, testing activation when you need to, and maintaining the plan. And we're going to cover all of these steps relatively quickly. The next slide that talks about distribution and promotion, every team member should have all or part of the plan, paper and electronic copies like Carol's, if you can. The plan may contain information, confidential information, so limit that. And copies at an office, at home, and in your car. Although, I will say, one of my Arizona colleagues for many years, he said, I had copies in all those places. Well, during one of our monsoons, the building started to get a little bit of flooding. And he said, oh, had my copy at home. Water came in over the transom and came into his house. And he said, well, at least I have the copy in the trunk of my car. And he was out to dinner after going out and helping a couple of places. And the other people who were at dinner with him said, hey, Michael, isn't that your car floating down the street backwards? So he had 3 copies. Luckily, I think he would say, have one in the cloud too, because all 3 of those things were sort of scotched after what happened. Promotion, adding sections to the internal newsletter, putting it on your intranet, your company email, periodical, monthly, or quarterly emails about the plan, and then get on staff meeting agendas to do practice of portions of the plan. So let's go to the next step after that, the training step. And with training, on the next slide, we've got a number of things that I want you to look at. Training the disaster team and their alternates to get some training specific to their roles. All personnel need orientation. Everybody needs orientation to the plan and at least some training. Can you have with your disaster team and the alternates the idea of making sure that they have health and safety training like CPR, help stop the bleed, and some other types of training? Practice evacuation, fire safety, shelter in place, hostile intruder, all of those types of situations. And work with police, fire, and COADs and VOADs, the community organizations active in disasters, and the volunteer organizations active in disasters as well. So those are a couple of things to think about in the training that you would want to do. And we're going to move on to talking about one more slide past this too. Why you test the plan. Well, it reveals the weaknesses to mitigate before the next disaster. You can identify personnel and supply shortages. Yeah, we had some good people who were leading the group and telling them what to do for disaster preparedness and recovery, but you needed people to move things out of the building. So we need to get those taken care of. Improve coordination between people. Help staff and leadership gain confidence in the plan and improve participant skills. And ensure that employees understand what they're supposed to be doing during an emergency. Are they supposed to be evacuating? Are they supposed to be sheltering in place? Are they in a flight or fight situation? All of those things need to be looked at. So these are some of the reasons why you would test a plan. On the next slide, the activation of the plan is going to be important as well. And when you activate the plan, that is something where you're going to be verifying the availability of team members by activating the phone tree. That's an easy practice that you can do. Briefing the team on an incident and current conditions. What is the situation here with the disaster? Is it so bad that you do want people to come in, or do you want them to work at home and think about what they can do at home? And then assessing the damage to your building, operations and collections at the affected location, establishing recovery work sites and gathering supplies, and coordinate salvage efforts if you need to with recovery firms if they're more large scale. So I'm going to ask you to actually move 2 slides forward to talk about what needs to be done with some best practice examples. So if we can move forward, not, and one more from that to the resources page. If we can move forward one more to the best practice examples, yes, great. The reason I have these on here are that they are useful for a couple of different aspects of things. The Minnesota Historical Society plan, this has by format, and I swear it is completely A to Z. Well, at least it's archaeological materials to vinyl records. So it's A to V of materials that you would have. Amigos Library Services plan. Amigos doesn't run its preservation service anymore, but this is something that you can find online. They talk about the equipment and supplies that you needed. The COSA PrAC plan, that's the Council of State Archivists, have a really nice two-sided flip chart plan. The local plans, and for here in the DMV, we have the plan that Carol has put together, but it's sort of a national plan for that discipline. And then we have the Arts Ready 2.0 and sample plans on the PAR and NCAPER websites. So these are some good things that you can take a look at. And the next slide is on potential next steps. And that's where we are going to get into a couple of different things with your questions and working with your specific plans. So if you have a current plan or ideas on your current plan, we are going to be able to talk with you about that today. If you're developing a new plan, try that type of risk assessment that we talked about earlier and do that at your organization. Do that, use those 2 handouts and do the rating of what's the biggest threat and what are the certain threats for fire, water, security, architecture. We have Performing Arts Readiness has a plan review service that's free. We look at probably a dozen to 20 plans every year, and that is going to even continue after January 1st. And we look at all different types of coverage and all different types of plans. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was this idea of future DC network activities. And this could be something through the Alliance for Response, joining up with the Alliance for Response here in DC, or it could be even something that the DC Commission on Arts and Humanities might be able to help with. Because there are a lot of things you can do. Tabletop exercises. I love doing those. And they are something that can put you in a disaster situation and you talk through it and you put your plan up against this tabletop and it can be really interesting. I'll tell you, from the tabletops that I've done, people start off talking and having a conversation at a pretty low level. But as they go through these different steps and what happens in the disaster, it gets more high pitched and it gets a little bit louder in the room. And people are saying, oh, we need to do this, this, and this. And it allows you to work your plan according to a disaster. And we have some scripts that we can use that use that with you. Are there preservation grant proposals? One of the things that we used to be recommending to people a lot were the preservation assistance grants from National Endowment for the Humanities. Those are on a bit of a hiatus now, but there are other state preservation grants that you can get and other community foundations and family foundations you can work with. Getting vendors or emergency service to do visits. And it might not even just be a visit during the day or a walkthrough. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was there is a museum in Philadelphia that had a first responders night. And part of the first responders night was they had some ropes out so people could rappel from the third level down to the first floor. And I think that was cool because it was responders and their families. And some of the families hadn't really seen somebody in action, one of the parents in action, rappelling down a wall. So they got to see that and the people got a chance to practice. And I thought that was really interesting. So you can have vendor and emergency services visits. And that's the other thing that I wanted to mention here. Are there any areas, Carrie, are there any areas that any of the rest of you would think about are some good next steps that could build on what we've talked about here? What are your thoughts there, Carrie?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a website now that lists most specifically DP resources for emergency management planning. As you mentioned, the BOAD, DP BOAD, another organization that you can reach out to. And then on the grant side of our grant team, while we don't have a specific grant program for emergency prep, there is capital projects. And you can use that to strengthen infrastructure systems, which includes making the organization more resilient to emergency. So you want to reach out to those program managers and work with your language and narrative to make emergency preparedness a part of your grant application. Maryland folks, I'm sure Maryland has grant programs that might be appropriate, but I can't speak to that.
Yeah, and I think, yes, up at the top.
Also, for Maryland, Washington,
Mhm.
we have the www.grantdc.gov.
Okay,
That is more local for the District of Columbia.
yes,
And it's everything in one place. Everything you need to know about emergency preparedness. How do you put a plan in place?
Mhm.
Remember, our job in the District of Columbia is to say life and property. That means it's one plan. You can
Mhm.
fix in any area, whatever you want.
Mhm.
And I would say we're still on our reach out to folks here, and they're also on our website.
And yeah, I said some things this morning about the life safety and how important that is, but I don't talk about that as much. And, we got to step back. So I have ear safety with people here. I went to one organization, was teaching there, and I said, I don't care if you have a copy of the Gutenberg Bible, life safety needs to be first. Unfortunately, it was a place that held the Gutenberg Bible. So I had a little bit of a debate for about 5 or 10 minutes with them, and they were like, no, we need to keep this. And I was like, no, you need to save lives first. And they finally agreed with me. But, it's that kind of thought that you need to consider. And I think that the last slide that we had was really for questions and discussion. And we wanted to see what questions and what other ideas all of you have related to disaster planning in general. And, thinking about anything that we covered either this morning or in this afternoon session on building your plan that you had questions over that you need to know more about.
Can we turn the house lights up so we can see everything?
And also the commission, DP commission, on the Arts Committee, also the general operating
Excellent. Okay. Other questions that you might have or other comments that you might
Well, I just think we did the right.
have? We had a
Yeah,
question.
we got it all right.
I have a suggestion I found helpful is a visual guide as well as a flip through. My organization works on, well, is partly county government, but we have a lot of shared spaces.
Mhm.
And when it comes to contracting responsible for what, it's not just, oh, it's a ground issue, it's specifically this guy does the tree, but not the mulch, and not this. So having a guide that shows you that's what,
Yes.
is
Yeah.
very helpful. Just a visual, this problem, I go to this page.
And I think that that's really important with the fact that, that it's who does what in both blue sky times when there isn't a disaster happening and so you know who's responsible for what. And then when we have gray sky, like we do right now, times, knowing who can do what is important at that point too. Thank you for that suggestion.
What was the, I couldn't hear.
The idea of having sort of a visual guide or a guide of who does what and the roles that people play. And it can be the roles that people play in their job and then turn over to the roles that they might play.
And that's actually in the guide that I have. There's a form for all of that.
So it's like there's an app for that, but there's a form for that with.
There's a form for
with Carol's
everything.
one. Other questions? Yes.
I was wondering if you all had any good examples of plans that do a good job of addressing post-disaster, like institutional, psychosocial dimensions. So what happens when you as a person are dealing with your own personal trauma, or your board is, dead, dying, unreachable, you've got to still function as an institution, but if you can't, you phone a friend, and where are those friends? Do you have any good examples? Sorry, that's kind of morbid.
And I haven't seen examples of plans that do that, but I've seen examples of some really good articles about first-person situations. The Wichita Falls Art Museum had a situation where, yes, their museum got damaged really badly, but the city was damaged badly. The staff's homes were damaged badly, and so you have to think about that and what's going on there. There have also been, let me see, there was one other one that I was thinking of that was a little bit more recent than that. And this was actually using something in practice outside of a facility. After Hurricane Harvey, one of the things that had been happening was the Houston Methodist Hospital System had an incredible, really good music therapy and sort of that type of treatment situation. They had it inside their hospital and it was really well known. Well, after Hurricane Harvey, they went out into the field to all of the evacuation centers and all the aid centers and started using it with children and with adults at those centers. And there's been quite a decent amount written about Houston Methodist. That is the biggest new area that we're starting to talk about, one of two. I'd say the first area that hasn't been concentrated on very much that we're trying to concentrate on more is with accessibility issues in both disaster preparedness and event safety. And then the second thing is looking at the potential mental toll and what you need to do to get people to feel like they even want to go back to work again.
I'd love to add to that. Thank you so much.
Sure.
This critical incident stress management,
Mhm.
that general area will handle how you can manage yourself, your team, and everyone. And I think that's even something we can do within our families and our households.
Mhm.
So I think this gentleman is one of the gold star for today.
Yes.
Talk about how we should take care of ourselves.
Yes.
While we're trying to take care of others and artifacts and everything else.
Yes, exactly.
That's a wonderful point. And I do want to plug for the local government one more time, our Preparedness website.
Mhm.
It's ready.dc.gov, READY.gov. And there's a lot of information and opportunities to connect locally with the business, as well as the regions throughout West.
And I think one of the things that I've been really interested in seeing is that all these billboards that you see around that say have a family disaster plan, and that really is going to be important because if you're a disaster team member, you're going to want to be in good enough shape to, go, and you're going to also want to watch out for yourself. I have a friend, I always call this the Texas tornadoes, and I'm a music fan, so it makes me sort of laugh because I remember that group from a long time ago. But there were some tornadoes that happened that went right down the main street of some small communities. And one of them, it hit City Hall, it hit a hospital, it hit the library and really damaged the library a lot. And the director of the library, who still to this day is a dear friend of mine, she was so concerned because the roof got blown off of the library and water fell into the main facility. But then they had a flooding rain overnight the day after, and that got all over the facility. So it went from her saying, we've got to get 4,000 books out of here to we've got to get every single one of the 34,000 books out of here. She stayed there for the first 72 hours after the disaster. And after that, she had to be taken to the hospital because she got pneumonia. She was laid up for 14 days, was not able to figure out what needed to go where, was not able to trace what went where. And they had a situation toward the end where 3,000 of their books, they didn't know where exactly they went to get dried out because she was not able to trace that and she hadn't really talked to other people. So this whole idea of not having it be all on one person, but also taking care of yourself is really important as well. And we got a question here and over there as well.
And it's not so much a question, it's more of a shout out to HSEMA. They are, again, a district resource, and they do amazing workshops on individuals or your home. And I think that's a good point. If you're planning for your organization, you should be planning for your home, and then your staff workshops where I personally got great backpack full of some Apple gear. So it just depends on which workshop you reach on. So again, check the website, use the city resources.
And I just want to piggyback on what you're saying, because there are a lot of resources that we don't know about. And you have to do the research. And I always tell another story. I asked my son, I said, I spent over $150,000 for your education. What do you know? And he always responds, I know everything. And then he added to that by saying, as long as there's Google, I know everything. So there are resources out there that you can certainly tap into.
Mm-hmm.
Please, we do thank you all. I've seen the site too. Really good stuff.
We have another question over here.
Oh, yes, this is a two-parter for you all and anybody else that's in the space. So I work at the Children's Museum for ages for second graders up to about eighth graders. And we have school visits Monday through Friday with about 150, 200 students around 10 a.m. to about 4 p.m. every day. One of the things that we struggle with, just speaking about stress management up top, is that the first time that we did first person shooter training involved a local police officer and it was not received well. Whether it be experience of their own personal trauma from dealing with a first person shooter and their children in school or a family member.
Mm-hmm.
So even things of, we didn't show any videos of any incidents, but just even hearing recordings like set off like some people's trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted to be, of course, more aware of that.
Yes.
The second training that we did not involve a police officer. We just showed our own space, emergency paths, things that you can do.
Mm-hmm.
The other side of this is, though, is that we are located, if you haven't been there, we're surrounded by glass. Everything in the building is glass. And there are situations where if there is an individual that gets inside, even if you close the door, we have 4 jewel boxes that are glass studios. If you close that door, that person is still looking in. So it's very difficult to tell somebody that, hey, these are the things that you should do, when honestly and truthfully it's not a high success rate if somebody gets in. Just being honest. There's like, if you get to a bathroom before those are closed, you cannot see through. We have like a couple storage areas, but like, yes, it's a beautiful space because it's glass, but in that situation, it's almost the worst place to be in because you can see everything.
And I think one thing that I'll just mention real quickly with that is, is the glass on the outside any type of shatterproof or bulletproof glass? Okay. Thinking about moving toward that is important. The other thing is, though, thinking about one of the suppliers that I would have on my list would be a glazier, a glass replacement company. I worked in North Texas, and there was a library there that had beautiful, all the way around the first level, beautiful picture windows into the facility. But for some reason, people on the weekends like to test out their firearms and drive around and shoot out the windows of the library. And so, and I would never have been offering to be on this disaster team. They had people who would sit in lawn chairs in front of the windows after they had been shot out to wait until the glass replacement people came. And I was like, no way, I'm not on that team. But, thinking about what to do if that kind of situation happened, and then thinking about too, what other types of security do you have, even though you do have all that glass that's in there? Carol, did you have something on that?
I was gonna say, I feel your pain. Okay, you really have to find a stakeholder that has enough power to make a difference. And that may be the board, the ED, somebody has to take it on so that it becomes a priority. And you're gonna have to pressure the powers that be to make sure they understand the liability, because people don't like that word, okay? Anytime it's gonna cost them money, you have to remind them the liability if someone gets hurt. So that's sort of the approach you have to take sometimes with people who have blinders on and they don't get it in terms of the full picture of safety.
We look into like whether it be automatic or manual shading that people
Yeah.
Mhm.
that's fine. The one good thing is that there's no access to the building. You have to have a F5. We have security for that, but I mean still
But still press,
things can happen. But
yes, but you have to press, this is a liability. You know, and once you start talking about that, then you start to get people's attention, especially folks that are not hearing you when you're just talking about the safety of something.
Right, that's right. Thank you.
Up here.
Sort of a follow-up to what you were saying, sir. I work for a gallery that's supposed to help disabilities. And 75% of the population are disabilities. And our staff, 70% of 75% we're small staff. So there have been concerns around safety, especially in our events. We've had to do it right under the building, of course, they're right in. But because there are so many other staff and participants, the desire to integrate the kids. We're not very raised about it. I get increasingly more of this stuff more time than other person to see. So what we have done is we've had a de-escalation training, which at least help on some level, and we did it much through that's a good point about the de-escalators.
And we have on the PAR website, one of my colleagues put together a piece about what to do to protect your building in cases of civil unrest. And that's about a 4-page leaflet. We did have somebody who got on Twitter and said, hey, are you doing this because of the protests, or are you doing this to fight the protesters? And we were like, no. In fact, the politics of everybody who had any part in writing that leaflet are people who would be on the protester side and probably are out there doing some of that. But what we wanted to do was to make sure that parts of different buildings are not damaged. And we've had really strange things going on, especially in my former home state of Ohio, where there are some groups who are in some very rural settings who are doing some damage and some vandalism to historical societies, museums, arts organizations, so we have to watch out for that. Yes.
I would add, years ago, I took the International Foundation for Cultural Property Protection.
Yes.
And, I did the conflict, kind of resolution class. And, I also did like how to escape the first person shooter. And it was nice because it wasn't a local cop, it was like somebody from outside the community. And in some cases, that's better, like it's not tainted by anybody else. And, I recommend their training. I thought it was very helpful because they just came in, they just laid the plan, and then we practiced like stop, drop, and run, or play whatever it was, and I thought it was very good. And that was also my other comment was about events. What I noticed recently for the Texas Tours was they had a huge musical event that was going to happen, and they had to decide to cancel it. It's their biggest fundraiser, for their organization. And that might be something you put in the plan, like at what point do you decide we can't do this event?
Yes. Yeah.
And when do we decide to do it when it's not a bad time, right?
And we have a one-shot deal. Well, the recording will be around after this, but we have someone who teaches for PAR. Her name is Kelly Hubbard, and she is the emergency management officer for the county of Santa Barbara, California. And she has an amazing class, which I heard her the first time she ever gave this presentation live, and you could hear a pin drop, except everybody was crying in the background because this is so heart-wrenching. She was at the Route 91 Harvest Festival where the person shot, was an active shooter out of the Mandalay Bay hotel building, and all those people got shot. She was there with her best friend and their two kids, and the two kids had just left for the concession stand when when the bullets broke out. And she talks about reuniting with her family. She talks about how people, escape from the area. And she also talks about going back to their hotel, which was being used as a triage center. Unfortunately, the lobby was a triage center after this happened. But that's one class. The other class that she just developed, and it had to be postponed from November because they were having that atmospheric river problem the week before Thanksgiving, and it's going to happen next week. It's called When to Cancel or Stop an Event. And so it's some of the things that she, as both a emergency manager, but as somebody who works with arts organizations, and she's probably one of the best people in the country for working with arts organizations from an EOM, she talks about what factors you should look at. So I think that's really important. I'll also say IFCPP, the International Federation for Cultural Property Protection, is a great organization. We had a chance to do a festival safety program with them last year when they had their conference up in New Haven, and we're actually going to be on site at the New Orleans. It's not the Jazz Heritage Festival, but it's one of the smaller festivals that they have in April with the IFCPP conference. We're going to do one of our Art of Mass Gatherings sessions for people to think about safety, security, and other issues at something like that. So definitely a good group to work with.
Yeah, and I think it really boils down to leadership as well, and being able to be in that position where, you say, I'm gonna make some bad decisions, I'm gonna make some good decisions, but I'm gonna make decisions. And really being able to assess what is happening. It's always better to be safe than sorry. And that's just a common sense piece. But really being able to say, if this is not safe, I'm not gonna take a chance. So it's a leadership call. And hopefully whoever is at the top can make that decision and live with it.
And people get mad when there are 40,000 people at a festival or an event, and you say there's a thunderstorm coming, you got to get out of here, and get to your cars or wherever, and then they miss an hour of the festival. But I will say again, I don't usually talk about specific companies, but there's a really good festival production company called Danny Wimmer Productions. They are outside. They're from the Los Angeles area. and they are so safety minded. They're really great. They had, they were doing before their 21 version of some of their outdoor festivals. I know with the fact that I have a suit jacket on, it doesn't look like I would go to a heavy metal and alternative music festival, but I did. And they had people had to either present their license and their COVID vaccination cards, or they went in and did a COVID test in a in a trailer right outside the grounds. And I don't know if they did this at all of their sessions, but I know that for at least one festival that I was at, they bought back tickets from people who were positive. I don't think they had to do more than 20 to 25 of those, but they were like, we don't want you in there with the other 40,000 people causing a big problem. So again, they have great safety things going on, but the the thing that they joke around about, and they're actually selling T-shirts. They did this last year. Is that they say we have all these bands on the bill, but if there's bad weather, the band that you're going to hear is Take Cover. So we always talk about Take Cover being our least favorite band that plays at any of the festivals.
Yeah, and Beyonce doesn't make it any easier because she'll do her whole concert in the rain.
Yes.
So it's crazy, and it's a different call for each different situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, most techs, once it starts to rain, they're gonna put everything away. It might have a lightning strike hit it, but some of these folks, they keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we've seen a couple of those situations where people have kept going, and it's been to the detriment of people in the audience. But you've seen other ones where people completely stop the performance. I'm seeing that more often now than I ever have before, where the person up on the stage is going like this and saying, "We got somebody who's injured in the audience. We're going to stop playing for 5 minutes while they get that person out of there." So I think the artists are even becoming more cognizant of the kind of things having to do with crowd safety as well.
Is there somebody else that has a comment or a question?
Yes.
Just a couple of things, just to feedback off everybody. Just the FYI, Coach Steve Brown and the government has a crowd management training that you can take for free and get like a certification as well. It's a quiz you can take online. If you do a search, you can do that. And two, to your original comment about active shooter and teams that a really good one is the FBI active shooter training online on YouTube. You can search for it. It's Run Hide Fight. It's a quality training. It's not like your OP back in the 70s, 80s type of training. It seems like they put money into it. Like you feel like you're immersed in that experience that they're having, telling you what to do in certain situations. So those are the two things that you guys, anyone with whatever your organization that can help build that confidence within the teams to know what to do in certain situations. So,
Can I ask you a question as well? With the influx of that many kids coming in every day, is there initially in the beginning some quick orientation for them in terms of emergency exit, or you follow this person if there's an emergency?
So the children, yeah. So as soon as they enter the space, the educator is going to do like a quick promise on what's a little situation. And then also too, we have monthly training that we do anyway. So we'll let the school know that, and we'll do like a quick fire drill for their business response plan. Schools will too, and then also the building, built their own fire drills and that nature. So let the schools know that, hey, sometimes we control it, sometimes we don't. This will like impact the visit of time. So we have to like,
That's cool.
to your point, so the question, that's the second big deal to highlight that we had a contract with them right now. We have also too, another good conference to go to, whenever you're there. It was in Baltimore this past year, the Facilities Manager Conference takes place. And they go over all these things as far as risk management and then other things for facilities as well too. And then one of the things, the sessions is like personal shooter. So yeah,
And I think ASIS, ASIS is another good group who does some level of that training as well, security training. So, and the other Run Hide Fight, the thing that I've seen that's been really good is Houston Police Department did one that they did a number of years ago, but it still stays together pretty well.
And I think it's really important to, whatever area you're in, that you are at least familiar with your precinct, your police precinct, and they know you. You know them, they know you. Same thing with your fire department, what's your closest fire department. That's part of what I have in the guide in terms of writing down who is your contact at your specific precinct. Where's your closest urgent care or emergency or hospital? All of those things are part of the information you want to have on hand. Because like we say, a lot of times these emergencies happen and the people who really should be there handling it are not there. It's the intern, okay? And they need to know what's going on. So don't be afraid to share information. It's just, you know what's secure for your organization, what's not.
And these disasters often tend to happen on weekends, and they also often tend to happen on holidays. And so you're going to just generally have a skeleton crew that is available. The other thing, when you mentioned urgent care and hospitals, that I was going to say is before COVID, I would not have thought of this, but now one of the things I'm asking people to put in their disaster plan is a contact with the local public health department. Again, Santa Barbara, the public health person came out and worked with the Arts Council, worked with the Office of Emergency Management, and said, hey, listen, we got to figure out a way, if we're going to get back to performing, if we're going to get back to crowds, we got to figure out a way to keep this safe. And a lot of people are doing that as well. So that's another outreach group. That's another group that you can work with. The most interesting thing that's happened that I have seen, and this is just from people whose families I know, the interest in public health education right now is going through the roof. I know 3 kids who are in college who are doing public health degrees, and I would have never guessed that before. And I think a lot of it is because of COVID, but a lot of it is because there's just interest in fellow people's well-being. And I really appreciate that idea as well. Any other questions? These have been great questions, great comments, really good resources for us to look at. One of the things we wanted to do, and we still can if you are interested in it, is if you have a specific disaster plan that is partially done and you want to ask some questions to fill in one of those areas, Carol and I can do that. If you say, well, I haven't built one at all, where should I start? We can do a little bit of that one-on-one type of talking for the last little while here. So let's think about that and think about any other questions that you might have, whether they are general or yes.
Do we want to do that in the lobby if they want to sit down?
Yeah, we could actually do that in the lobby if you want. We could sit down at tables to do that. So I'll say this is sort of the end of the formal part of the training here, and then we'll adjourn to be able to have Carol and I buzzing around between tables and talking with you about your plans. But thank you for coming today, and thank you for staying through the afternoon as well as the morning. We appreciate it.
Yay, and on behalf of the commission, we thank everybody for coming. Again, we have resources on our webpage that list the different resources that have been mentioned, so you can find those organizations. And this is a second in a series of workshops we've done. We don't do emergency management, so that's why we put up the resources page, but we'll see what we are up to in the future. So thank you again for coming.
All right, and thank you, Carrie.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So we'll get you.
Yeah, that sounds good. You know what? I've written all over all the handouts. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Sure.
I need to run.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.